In March 2020, Manuel Ellis died while he was handcuffed in police custody. 3 officers involved in the incident are on trial. Matthew Collins and Christopher Burbank are charged with second-degree murder and first-degree manslaughter. Timothy Rankin is charged with first-degree manslaughter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Christine Pei. For the duration of the trial, King 5 will recap the biggest developments in the courtroom, and we will discuss what it all means. Today, we sit down with the retired Pierce County Superior Court Judge Brian Tollefson, also attorney Mark Lindquist, who served as Pierce County prosecuting attorney for nearly a decade, and Seattle University School of Law adjunct professor Mo Hamoudi, who also has experience practicing criminal defense law. King 5's Drew Mickelson is also joining us from the Pierce County Courthouse in Tacoma to recap this week's events for us. And Drew, let's start with you. What were the key moments from court this week?
Oh, quite a few, really, Christine. And I think the jurors are going to have a lot to think about this weekend and in the coming weeks. This week alone, they heard from some experts, but also Manuel Ellis' mother and 2 eyewitnesses, 2 civilians, as they called them, who were there the night that Ellis had his encounter with Tacoma police. Witness Sarah McDowell was on the stand the longest, testifying almost for 2 full days. She drove up to the Tacoma intersection that night, right as the fight began. She recorded some of it on her cell phone. She says Ellis appeared to just be walking down the street when he was called over to the police car and then knocked to the ground by the passenger, quickly opening his door on the patrol car. She says Ellis was not the aggressor that night. Defense attorneys for the officers say Ellis was high on meth and threatened the officers, started the fight, and would not stop fighting with them. We are expected to eventually hear from at least one of those officers about what they saw and did that night. Now, these first 2 key eyewitnesses, McDowell and her ex-boyfriend, Keon Lowry, who he was in a car right behind McDowell, they both testified that police were clearly in the wrong that night, testifying that when they saw the fight, they both got out of their cars and yelled at the Tacoma officers to stop hitting Ellis.
I felt I needed to help him.
Who did you need to help?
Manuel Ellis.
Why did you feel like you needed to help him?
Because the activity I was seeing wasn't something I've seen cops do.
When I seen Manuel not doing anything and then him getting attacked like that, it wasn't right. I've never seen that happen before. I've never seen a cop do that to anybody. And so it was like the worst thing I've ever seen. It was scary. It wasn't okay.
And when defense attorneys had a chance to cross-examine both those witnesses, they focused on the fact that some of the facts they testified to this week were different than some of the details that they brought up during their initial investigation interviews dating back to 2020, whether or not their windows were up, whether or not they had actually seen a taser in the officer's hands. Quite a bit was made about the fact that Miss McDowell changed her story when it came to which officer hit first, the passenger or the driver who came around. The bottom line was neither of those witnesses changed their thoughts about the fact that Ellis was clearly the victim in all of this.
And it's different than what you told the jury happened yesterday.
Right, but I think it was just, or definitely was just either being nervous or just confused, just nervousness, because I said that and being confused with the officers, who was who.
The defense attorneys also made a clear point that no one has any video of the very beginning of this incident. You can expect that to be brought up throughout the rest of this trial as well. Another point that the defense attorneys made with Miss McDowell was that she posted on social media for months over the last few years defending Ellis that night, also using words like murderers to describe the Tacoma police officers. And at one point she also said that she couldn't wait for them to go on trial because they were going to get what they deserve. Christine?
I spoke to him that night. I was the last person that spoke to him. Mom, I really want to give my life to the Lord. I'm tired of the lies. I'm tired of just being out here. I want to be here for my family.
Our thanks to Drew for that recap. But also this week, we heard from Ellis's mother, Marcia Carter Patterson. Patterson gave a very emotional testimony. Let's take another listen.
But he was very gregarious that night and just more at peace. I did not hear from him anymore. That was the last time that I heard from him. It was the worst day of my life.
So let's open the discussion up. Last week, week one, we heard from Ellis's sister. This week, we heard from Ellis's mother. How do you think her testimony resonated with the jury? We'll start with you, Mark.
Moms are awesome. Moms love their sons. Sons love their moms. It makes sense for the prosecutor to call mom, but she doesn't know what went on that night. So you're only bringing in mom to humanize Mr. Ellis, and so it's a witness worth calling, but in the long run, not a lot of impact.
I think they also wanted to really hit home that she lost her son. There was obviously the emotional component.
Right.
What were your thoughts in just the way that not only the prosecution, but even how the defense approached the cross-examination of her?
I wouldn't have cross-examined her.
Yeah.
There's no points to be scored. When she said this was the worst day of her life, we all know that's true.
Yeah, certainly. What were your thoughts, Judge? And Mo?
You'll notice that one defense attorney for, I think it was Rankin, no questions at all.
Right.
The one who asked the most was not Burbank's attorney, but the other attorney for the other. He got a little bit deeper into it, but all three, I think the strategy of all three of the defense attorneys was, there's not we can do a lot with his testimony, and I was surprised that any of them asked any questions at all. I agree with Mark that probably the best thing from a defense standpoint would have been, thank you, ma'am, we're sorry for your loss,
Right.
no questions.
Mo, your thoughts because of your experience as a trial lawyer.
I thought that her testimony was actually quite powerful. The understanding is that the juries are not swayed much by emotion, but in reality, subconsciously, they're impacted by every aspect of the case. And what she did was, one, bring a religious component to the case, talking about his desire for redemption, and place that into timing context to a day prior to his death.
Yes.
And even if the jury instructions are going to tell the jury not much to do with that, that's now been heard and it's been absorbed by the jurors.
Certainly. Let's get into some of the other testimony that we heard from throughout the week. As Drew laid out for us, we heard from several key witnesses this week. These were the witnesses who submitted that very critical cell phone video as evidence of what happened the night Ellis died. Judge, you have seen so many cases in your career, countless. What were your takeaways from the testimony of Keon Lowry and Sarah McDowell this week?
Well, I think in my experience, jurors are always going to spend a lot of time looking at the videos. So when they get in that jury room, they're going to ask to see the videos, they're going to play the videos. How much they're going to tie that to the witness's testimony is another question. The witness, she was very calm, even under what I consider to be semi-withering cross-examination. She was very calm, and I think she came off well to the jury.
What were your thoughts on their overall demeanor? Because so much of it is hearing from them and see how confident they are. What were your thoughts in how they handled some of the cross? Because Sarah McDowell did get, as Drew had mentioned, the whole goal from the defense was that she would be discredited. She had to kind of backtrack a little bit from her prior statements. How do you think she handled everything, Mark?
2 days is a long time to be in a courtroom for anybody, let alone a civilian witness.
Yeah.
From what I saw, her body language was pretty open. I agree with the judge that she remained calm. I agree with something Mo said earlier, which is jurors absolutely are moved by emotions, so they're reacting to her emotionally as well as, factually what she's saying. That all said, she had a couple of credibility issues that they went after pretty hard, one of which was she got in this text message argument, and she text messaged something like, I'm going to lie to shut you all down, or I'm lying to shut you all down, which she said was actually a typo, and it was supposed to be dying to shut you all down. I think this was before iPhone allowed you to edit text. But either way, the defense can argue, sounds like there's an agenda here.
So going a little bit more deeper into the cross-examination, the whole goal behind the defense is trying to discredit her. A lot of this evidence is a cell phone video, which shows the moment that the scuffle happened. The question is, what happened before what the video shot? And I think that's what the defense is trying to get into here with, what she saw and what she said she saw before that passenger door opened versus what was laid out in the cell phone video. What do you think, Mo?
Well, I think I would what I would say is that, and the public needs to understand that this is a use of force case. And the question is that was the initial use of force justified? And part of that narrative has to do with what Ms. McDowell testified to, which is that they were the aggressors. They jumped at him. And that aspect of the interaction is not on video. So what the defense was trying to do was trying to divide and conquer this witness.
Sure.
Essentially taking her testimony apart, and they used a lot of what I call techniques of repeatedly saying, did you remember, did you recall? And there was a lot of things that she did not remember or recall.
Yeah.
And also to demonstrate to the jury that she had an interest in the outcome of the case. Now, what does that mean? Not this case in general, but the way the jury instruction is actually crafted. It says outcome of the issues.
Sure.
And the issues really have to do with the relationship of the police and Mr. Ellis. And that was their strategy in the broader sense, to be able to then capitalize on it at closing, to say, you cannot trust what she says about what happened outside of that video.
Certainly. I mean, go ahead,
Well,
Judge,
if I
yes.
could add, I think that's why the jury's going to focus more on the videos, because the video's the video. There it is.
Yeah.
And that's why they may not spend a lot of time dissecting her testimony one way or the other. They're going to look at the objective stuff.
Yeah, go ahead,
They
Mark.
tend to forget what the witnesses say, especially in a 2-month trial.
Yes.
I completely agree. Visual evidence is especially valuable. The problem here, as you've already pointed out, though, is nobody has the beginning of the interaction on video.
Certainly. So we heard from the witnesses. Another thing that we do want to discuss, yesterday the state had a Pierce County death investigator take the stand. They spent quite a long time opening evidence and laying out items from the night that Ellis died, including his clothing and also the spit hood that was put over his head. If you can recall from this part of the testimony, it was painstaking to watch them open the evidence bags, take out items of clothing. Could you explain just the whole methodology of this part of laying out the evidence? This is something that the jury is seeing for the first time.
Yeah, one of the more tedious aspects of the trial, Judge, you've been through this many times.
Yes.
But, the jurors sit back, they're patient, and they focus in when they need to. What I will say that to me is significant is lawyers tend to think experts are more important than jurors do. Lawyers love calling experts, and here's what happens. Both sides call an expert or two, and the experts are highly educated, well-spoken, very experienced, and completely contradict each other.
Yes.
So we're back to where we started. What does the jury think happened?
The thing is, though, was there at all an emotional component to this? Because some of these items were quite powerful. These are items of clothing that Manuel Ellis was wearing at the time. Was it important for the prosecution to show the jury these items, from an emotional standpoint even?
Well, they showed photos, too.
Yes.
The photos, I think, is what the jury's going to be more focused on than the items of clothing. That's the way I would look at it.
Okay. So yesterday we not only heard from the death investigator, but we also heard from Dr. Roger Mitchell. He is a forensic pathology expert, and he teaches medical students and residents about hypoxia at Howard University. As we know, hypoxia was listed by the medical examiner as Ellis's cause of death. Dr. Mitchell said that specifically that way police restrained Ellis clearly played a role in his death. And here are some of what he said on the witness stand.
It was not only hypoxia, because hypoxia played a part, but the fact that Mr. Ellis could not move his chest and his and to be able to breathe the way he needed to breathe because of his position and because of the presence of individuals on top of him. That goes to not just hypoxia, but also cardiac output, right? How his heart is functioning.
So this is also very critical because how Ellis died is one of the most important parts of the case. Both the state and defense are trying to prove opposite theories about his cause of death. How effective do you think Dr. Mitchell was in making the state's case? I'll start with you, Judge.
Well, we haven't heard all his testimony yet.
Sure.
It stopped with an objection to the hobble restraint. I don't know if you remember that at the end of his testimony.
Yes.
And there was a whole bunch of stuff that happened after the jury was excused for the day, another 15, 20 minutes of interaction between the attorneys and the judge before the judge, I think, made a ruling about what was going to come in and what wasn't going to come in. So we haven't heard the last of his testimony yet. And it was very technical. I hope that there's, for the jury's sake, I hope that there's going to be a little bit more clarification so the jury can understand what he's getting at as opposed to what Dr. Clark was getting at.
Technical in the sense that a lot of medical terminology, perhaps hypoxia is not a common word used. What were your thoughts, Mark?
You know, I had the same thoughts as the judge had. As I said earlier, I think lawyers put more stock in experts than jurors do. They'll pick out a few things, but you know the defense is going to bring in an expert to say he died of toxic dose of meth. And they've already got the medical examiner saying that could be the cause. They had a fatal amount of methamphetamine in his system.
Sure. So Mo's looking ahead to the cross-examination, which will likely be probably next week. What do you think their strategy will be in when they cross-examine him?
I think that if a framework to think about and consume the testimony of their expert is that how hypoxia caused his death, one, and a force, and how the officer's intent and behavior ties into that. So if you're the prosecutor, you got to lay the groundwork in simple terms, not in super complicated medical terms, that the cause of death was a mechanism. And then you have to tie into police officers' testimony or statements or behavior on the video to that to say that reckless behavior, that criminal intent, that conduct caused this death, the mechanism of which was testified to by our expert. And what the defense is going to do is essentially demonstrate that this person who is testifying is someone who's not the medical examiner.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the most obvious thing. Why isn't the Pierce County medical examiner testifying? Something's going on, and the jury's smart enough to understand that there's more to it than meets the eye.
We'll certainly be watching next week on the outcome of all of that. Thank you, by the way, everyone, for providing all of your insights. But I do want to have take a moment to kind of get your final thoughts, what we've seen with week 2 so far and what we could potentially see in the weeks ahead. I'll start with you, Judge Tollefson.
Well, I think I said this earlier, and I'll say it again. This is real early in the trial. This is going to be a long, long, long trial. Hopefully the jurors are going to be able to absorb all of this information and keep their minds open until the last of the evidence is presented and the last of the arguments are made. And that's what I hope for, and I hope they'll follow their instructions and do that. But it's a long, long trial, and this is just the start of it. So
we're only getting started.
The story is yet to be finished up.
Mo, what are your thoughts?
I think that the video speaks volumes. You had 2 citizens who took it upon themselves to videotape an interaction. I think that's a significant event. It is very premature to reach a conclusion. These officers are likely going to testify.
Yes.
Because they're going to have to provide the context as to what was going on in their minds and why they acted the way they did. And it will be interesting to see if all of them testify. If not, 2.
Well, I'll turn to you, Mark, for that. I know from the very beginning you've been saying the officers will testify. You're pretty convinced.
I am, and I'll wager on that if we can do that. And they have to.
Yeah.
The prosecution has 2 hurdles here. Number 1 is to show that the officer's use of force was unreasonable, and then secondly, that caused Mr. Ellis's death. We can talk about the video all we want, but the reality is the beginning of this interaction is not on video, and that's what's critical in determining whether or not the use of force was reasonable. And there's only 3 people left that can talk about the beginning of that interaction, and it's these 3 officers, and they've got to get up on the stand and tell their story. And I think that's what it's going to come down to.
Well, we will stay tuned, certainly, and kind of in the immediate future, at least, let's turn back to Drew Mickelson. For us, he's over there in Tacoma. So, Drew, from as far as you know so far, looking ahead to next week, what can we expect?
Well, Monday morning, we will see that medical examiner from Washington, D.C. back up on the stand. He, as we noted, has not finished his testimony yet. And then we'll get to cross-examination. And remember, we have 3 defendants, and they each have 2 attorneys. So each one of those defendants will have at least one of their attorneys have a chance to go after this expert and try to poke holes in his theory. As Mr. Lindquist said, those defense attorneys are going to have their own medical experts who come up with a completely different summary of what happened, completely different findings. So you can expect that to take a little bit. One witness we were told we were going to hear late this week, but that didn't happen, is the other eyewitness who was there that night, who shot the video. There are 2 clips of video that we've been showing and talking about. We've heard about the one from Miss McDowell. This second one was taken a little further down Ainsworth, which is the road leading up to the intersection. That one is a little bit longer as well, so you can expect that one to get a lot of attention, likely sometime next week.
Drew, thank you very much for that recap. And our thanks, of course, to our panel of guests today to parse everything out. We so appreciate all of your insights. So fascinating, a lot to break down. So we thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And of course, we will have more coverage on this coming up every single Friday. By the way, you can tune in on our streaming app, King 5 Plus, available on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV. Our weekly recap is also available on our YouTube channel. As always, you can keep up to date with our trial coverage on king5.com and our mobile app.